Welcome, everybody, to the 10th Siege Environmental Justice Symposium. Today is a celebration. Our theme is past, present, and future of the EJ movement. And we're going to really have an exciting 4 days of speakers, workshops, and sessions. Why are we here? We're here today to talk about environmental justice. You know the history of the EJ movement, right? And as y'all know, I like to talk about Dr. King, who was a father of the environmental justice movement, grandfather of the EJ movement because of his work in Memphis. But before we go too far into the occasion and this celebration, let's first do the land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making history led to this moment. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. So we acknowledge that the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people at the University of Maryland. We're the ancestral stewards of the sacred land. Who are the ancestral stewards of the sacred land? It is their historical responsibility to advocate for the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl, and those that swim. They remind us that clean air and pristine waterways are essential to all life. This land acknowledgement is a vocal reminder for each of us as two-leggeds to ensure our physical environment is better conditioned than what we inherited for the health and prosperity of those who come after us. I mean, and you think about this land acknowledgement, we also have to think about what today is. Today is the anniversary of 9/11. I would like to have a moment of silence for those who lost their lives, for the first responders who also lost their lives, and many who lost their lives later due to health issues because they wanted to save people. So let's take a moment of silence to remember those who lost their lives during the terrorist attack and that hit the Twin Towers in 2001. Okay, thank you, everybody. So again, why are we here? We're here to talk about environmental justice. You know, again, as I said, it is a celebration. 10 years of the symposium, 10 years of fighting for environmental justice, 10 years of talking about issues that are important to those who've been overburdened, underserved. As I was saying, you know, Dr. King, in many ways, is the grandfather of the environmental justice movement. So y'all remember with the sanitation strike in Memphis, you saw Black men carry around signs that were saying, "I am a man, recognized by humanity." When you think about the environmental justice work that we do, we're talking about the humanity of folks who've been overburdened, underserved, right? We're talking about the humanity of folks who've been dumped on. And so Siege was founded in 2011 to really help address these issues, to help work in partnership with communities who are dealing with environmental, energy, climate injustices, to use empowerment science to empower folks. I empower, help them use tools, build a capacity to address those issues, and also liberation science to liberate folks from toxic trauma, from sacrifice zones, from environmental racism and classism. So again, this occasion is important. You know, we want to honor the past while protecting the future. When you think about the symposium, we're really talking about how we can work together to address environmental, climate, and energy injustices in the Mid-Atlantic, around the country, and around the world. So what I want to do is slow down a little bit. I'm going to get to our keynote speaker who's waiting, Dr. Beverly Wright, but I want to give a few words about this occasion. And I want to start out, you know, giving a shout out to Miss Pamela Bingham, a member of our team, who's going through her health struggle. I'm not gonna get into all that. She can share that with y'all. But while she's been going through this struggle, Pamela was thinking about others, right? And that's the thing about environmental justice. We think about others. We think about other people are suffering, other people are struggling. So Pamela sent me a prayer book, y'all. And it says on the front of the prayer book, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Again, honor the past, being hopeful while protecting the future, y'all. That's the occasion. Again, this is a celebration of all the hard work of folks who've been in the movement, right? The work of folks in the 1970s, the 1960s, the work of folks in the 1980s. We want to honor that past. Hope. That's what this movement's about, while protecting the future. And we're really talking about Sankofa. Go back and get it. It's Ghanaian, it's Akan proverb, right? It's taboo to go back what we forgot and left behind. Don't leave it behind. Go back and get it. It's a phrase that encourages us to reclaim, remember our past, learn from the past, so we can move forward in the future. We can go back to the past. Remember that knowledge. Go back to your roots, folks. That's the occasion. Lifting up people as we move forward. That's what we're talking about when we're honoring the past. Remember the past while protecting the future. So you think about Sankofa. I want to go back and connect. Some of you know me. Sometimes I get a little bit in the preacher mode, minister mode, and I feel a little bit of spirit today. You got to have spirit, y'all, when you're doing environmental justice work. So Proverbs 4:13, always remember what you have been taught and don't let go of it. Think of all the things that the EJ movement has taught us over the years. Don't let go of it. Keep all that you have learned. It is the most important thing in life. So building off the past, remembering our roots. Building off the past, remembering our roots. But Buddha says, don't pursue the past. Do not lose yourself in the future. The past is no longer here. Look deeply at life as it is right now. So the present, what are we doing in the present? Let's celebrate the present. That's fight in the present. Practitioners dwells in stability and freedom. Environmental justice is about freedom. We must be diligent today. We must be diligent today. Do not wait till tomorrow, for it's too late. It's important. But also, thinking about Buddha, the moment can change a day, one day can change a life, one life can change the world. Think about movements, a movement of many moments, many days, many lives can also change the world, can change a country, can change the people. It's too late to wait for tomorrow. We must do it today. Remember your roots, right? Alex Haley talked about, Kunta Kinte and that trauma, slavery, subjugation, racism, and how people's been mistreated. But remember his name, right? We see the same with communities impacted by environmental slavery and oppression. the octopus of oppression, environmental apartheid. Again, remember your roots so we can move forward today. Remember your roots. The first symposium was December 1st, 2012. We had Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, Dr. Jalon White Newsom, Leslie Fields. We had Vernice Miller Travis as our first keynote speaker. You know, when you think about the symposium, you know, where all the things that we've done, where are we now? So, you know, this is an exciting time. We have 4 days of sessions. And if you want to tweet about the symposium, you got Siege EJ Symposium 2024. You know, we're gonna get to our welcome and opening keynote from Dr. Beverly Wright. But here's just a quick breakdown of our sessions that we have. Concurrent block 1, 11:10 to 12:25. We have a lunchtime plenary. You see concurrent sessions block 2, block 3, and also our closing plenary. On Thursday, we had Lennox Yearwood Jr. as our keynote. We have a cultural event that night. Mustafa is our keynote on Friday. And Vernice, who was our first keynote in 2012, will be our closing keynote for this symposium. Remember, it's a COFA. Remember the past while protecting the future. You reach back, right? We're reaching back, bringing Dr. Wright as our opening keynote because of all the great work she's been doing over her career. We reach back to Reverend Yearwood, who's been a keynote speaker before because all the work he's doing from a faith perspective. We reach back to Mustafa Santiago Ali, who's done a lot of work in his career as an EJ advocate with the EPA and now with the National Wildlife Federation. And we reach back to bring Vernice Miller Travis, one of those icons of the movement. Her work with We Act for Environmental Justice and now with the Metropolitan Group. At the end of day 4, we're going to have a post-symposium celebration. And I just want to thank the sponsors who provided support for this event. I'm just going to go through them real quickly. Meta, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Bezos Earth Fund, Skyline Foundation, folks at Hopkins Charm Center, Waverly Street, Union Concerned Scientists, EV Nor, World Wildlife Federation, and some other partners. And let's get to our keynote speaker. I am really excited to introduce Dr. Beverly Wright. She is one of the legends, icons, one of the, in many ways, the architects of the modern environmental justice movement. She's been fighting for years for environmental justice. She's been a mentor to many, a mentor to me. She's been one who struggled in this fight, right? Remember the past, doing work in the present to protect the future. She's an environmental justice scholar, advocate, author, civic leader, professor of sociology, founder and executive director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, the first ever environmental justice center in the United States. Under the Biden administration, Dr. Wright was appointed to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, WEJAC, where she advised on how the federal government can address current and historic environmental justices. Born in New Orleans, Dr. Wright has focused on addressing pollution in Cancer Alley. She developed the community university model, integrating community input into research and policymaking. Under her leadership, the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice addresses environmental inequities, provides education and job training, and created the first environmental justice map, now used by the EPA to allocate funding. Dr. Wright has done a lot of work with the UN, with COP. She is a global environmental justice leader. And she is going to open us up with our first keynote to help us celebrate this occasion, to help us remember the past, what we're doing right now in the present, and where we need to go in the future. So Dr. Wright, I will pass the mic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sakobi. Thank you very much. We're trying to get started here. First of all, I want to say to everyone who's listening, that Jacoby has given me a steep task to do in 40 minutes. I got my marching orders of what he wanted me to cover. It's really about 131 slides to do that, and I got it down to 74. So I want to get started, really just sort of introducing me, how I got into this movement, and then bringing us from where I started in the movement with all of our friends to where we are now. Um, but first, I'd like to begin with a tribute to Dr. Bunyan Bryan that we lost this year in March, who's basically responsible for educating the majority of African Americans and others in the field of environmental science and natural resources. He is singularly responsible for developing a PhD, master's, and BA degree in environmental justice at the University of Michigan. But he's also the person who actually got us all started interacting with the federal government, EPA in particular. We had all been doing work, but that conference, the Michigan group is what it was called, really started us on our path to working with the federal government to bring about change. So we lost him this year. He's dearly loved and will never be forgotten. So I'd like to just take you to the beginning of my work so that you can understand who I am, why I do what I do, where the movement is, at least from my perspective, and where I think we should be going. So I began my work in 1994 as a professor at the University of New Orleans. I was the only female and the only Black person in my department, but really on the whole campus in a tenure track position. It was a rare place to be at that time, but I was ready for the task. And I grew up during the civil rights movement, the height of the civil rights movement. And in my particular city, I use these pictures because that's the little girl, Bridges, who was integrated schools in New Orleans. I mean, elementary school with feds walking, taking her to federal feds, FBI, taking her to school. And I still remember it because there were thousands of people outside yelling and screaming at this one little girl I was integrating to school. This is what I grew up feeling, knowing, and seeing. And I use the middle picture, Dookie Chase Restaurant, because during segregation, of course, there weren't many places for us to go except places that were in our neighborhood, segregated um, restaurants, and there were only a few that I thought met the standards that we would like. I would like to take my family. And so the Dookie Chase restaurant, if you're ever in New Orleans, you should visit it. It's pretty famous with Leah Chase, who passed away. But this is where we went when we wanted to dress up and feel respected. And of course, there was just lots of demonstrations. The civil rights movement was in high gear when I was a teenager. Um, Family ties. So I grew up in a family that was absolutely involved in the civil rights movement, mostly through our church. My mother was one of the founding members of the first local NAACP in the city of New Orleans, which at that time was a dangerous thing to do because if they caught you with an NAACP card, they would beat you up. They showed on television police attacking people, stopping them, going through their wallets to see if they had it. So it was a pretty tough time for us, but my family, my community always had a lot of courage. And so I saw that in this idea of fighting. I left there and went to Grambling College. It's called Grambling State University now, but at that time, we had a number of students killed. Everyone remembers Kent State. What they don't remember is Jackson State and Southern University, Jackson State in Mississippi and Southern University in Baton Rouge, where students were first killed. And Kent State came after two incidences at HBCUs. Most people don't remember that, but I vividly remember that happening. And from there, I went to SUNY at Buffalo in New Orleans, where I got my master's and PhD and really unknowingly was really introduced to the field that I'm working in now. There was no connection between Love Canal at that time and where I ended up being. But looking back, I saw the connection and made the connection at some point. I had three professors, Dr. Moss, Dr. Farrell, and Dr. Adeline Levine, who was my true mentor on my path to become an environmental justice researcher, scholar, and advocate. And then I ended up being a professor at the University of New Orleans, an assistant professor of sociology, and to help you understand what was going on there, being the first Black in my department, the only one Black woman on campus in a tenure track position, and the only other Black people were four Black men on campus. The whole time I was at the University of New Orleans for a period of 15 years, we never had over 7 or 8 Black professors. The majority of time, we had 4. And generally, I was the only woman in that particular pack. Don't have time to give you the backstory. You have to read my book, but it was an interesting experience. Um, and so what was the catalyst for me actually becoming involved in its movement? Well, it was really the crisis that I was looking at, feeling, smelling in what's called Cancer Alley. And of course, at the time that I was growing up, it wasn't called that. We didn't realize that all of these chemicals were actually poisoning us. In fact, we saw it as a period of growth, even though because of segregation, the majority of African Americans did not benefit from the jobs in the petrochemical industry because the word had already come down, really a type of Jim Crow moment where the facilities were told not to hire Black people because they needed them in the fields to deal with their sugar cane and their rice and whatever. So although we were directly affected, we were not benefiting from it. And I love to show this picture because this is what has happened to Black communities up and down Cancer Alley. The land is so awful that it's only good for dead people, people who don't have to breathe. So you see these facilities that have grown upriver in our communities, taken our land, or actually built facilities right up to the fence line, forcing us to leave or stay and die from all different types of cancer, extremely high cancer rates in Cancer Alley. And this is what it looks like for people who've never seen it. It's an 85-mile tract of land between New Orleans and Baton Rouge that now has 152 petrochemical plants. When I was first started, it was 136. So we are going backwards in Louisiana. Most people are trying to move away from the petrochemical industry. We are embracing. So anything somebody else doesn't want, Louisiana says, we'll take it. And this is where we live now. So in looking at this whole story, and I'm gonna move a little faster now, industrial leaders basically call where we live the chemical corridor, but community people named it Cancer Alley because we produce about 1/4 of the nation's petrochemicals. And this was always, of course, seen as prosperity, but prosperity for whom? So this is a map just of the corridor showing you all of these little small towns that line the Mississippi River. But these are all of the chemicals that are produced along that river, and our communities are exposed to multiple chemicals, creating desperate health conditions and a lot of pain and suffering because of the high cancer rates that we experience in respiratory diseases and every other disease that any of these chemicals actually cause. And it's a dangerous place. We live with a lot of accidents. You can imagine that the enforcement is not extremely high and it's not regulated to the extent that they should. And so we have continuous accidents upriver where all of these facilities are. And our communities here for a long time have seen themselves as just an experiment. suffering miscarriages, cancer, respiratory ailments, and other serious diseases. And so when we became concerned about these particular conditions, what the community decided and they basically through discernment, realized that they were sick. And all of these terrible smells may have something to do with it. The manufacturing companies, right, just maybe 12 feet from their houses, sometimes lining their communities, may be causing these diseases. And that was a question that they wanted answered. And so communities complain. I use this example very quickly, like because it's rural communities, they had gardens in their backyard. This is what we're trying to get people to do now. They had them and lived a pretty clean, close to nature life. But when overnight the mustard greens would turn black, the pecan trees stopped bearing fruit, but aluminum window screens just fell off the windows about every 3 to 6 months because of the corrosive nature of the chemicals in the air. And we could always identify a community that was upriver because there would be these strange circles where the paint had been eaten off on one side of the car, and it was always the side that was downriver from the event. And so early on, I conducted what we call participatory research, where I was working at Xavier University at the time and brought students out to really, let's go see what's going on here. And what we saw was really awful. I think that all of this was happening because of the lack of enforcement of regulation and a racist culture that continued to not protect African Americans. And this is a scene that I saw all the time, where I would drive upriver, then I would see a place with empty slabs. And Black people and white people live very close to one another upriver. Even in New Orleans, the neighbors are neighborhoods considered all white or Black are really adjacent to one another. So looking at this particular slab, I asked a community member, I said, well, what's going on over here? And he said, oh, the white people lived over there. And the boss came down about 8 years ago and said that he bought them out and said he was going to buy us out and never came back. So when people say that environmental pollution, as our governor in Louisiana has said, is not intentional, that is not true. Everything about the siting of facilities in our communities was absolutely intentional. The intention was to move white people away to safety and leave us to languish among all of these toxic chemicals. So race matters. In our early research, we found that 80% of African Americans living in the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor live within 3 miles or 5 kilometers of a facility. And this was my first really contact with the government at a civil rights hearing that was being held, because community people began to rise up and say, something is wrong. And I was asked to testify. And at that hearing, I reported what I saw through my participatory research with students from Xavier, that African Americans live very close to these facilities and it was causing them harm. And in 1992, I started the Deep South Center with a gift from Dr. Norman Francis. He was the longest standing president of an HBCU and an absolutely wonderful man who's now like 93 or 94 years old. So I was at Xavier from 1992 to 2005, Dillard from 2005 to 2017. And now we're a standalone facility. And our mission was to provide opportunities for communities, decision makers, and scientific researchers to collaborate on programs and projects that promote the rights of people to be free from environmental harm as it impacts health in all of the conditions we've talked about. And we had 3 major objectives: partnership between universities and communities, interaction among components, and legacy. And we have 3 components: community education and training, which includes health and safety training, and research and policy studies, and primary and secondary environmental justice education and training. And this is the first GIS map ever done looking at the spatial distribution of TRI facilities by race and class. It was done by the Deep South Center in about 1994. Looks a lot different from GIS maps then, but it served the same purpose. It basically told us that African Americans in the corridor were living closest to these facilities and being impacted and put at greater risk than the whites in our communities. My work at the Deep South Center led me to develop a particular model for academicians working with communities, because what I saw was unethical. I saw no care for communities, and I mostly saw that the universities in Louisiana worked for the petrochemical industry. They got lots of money from them. Our political system was funded. All of our representatives were funded by the industry. So it's difficult to get really true research out of these universities because they were hamstrung by the money that they received for the facilities. And the majority of the people who were doing research were only trying to get tenure, never came back to communities, and communities had just a horrible attitude towards academicians. I did not see myself being that person. And so I developed what I call this non-threatening environment for communities and academicians to come together to solve problems in an effective way. And so the model had specific guidelines established. It incorporated citizen science, community-based participatory research, and research to action methodology. When I was doing that, these names did not exist in 1992. So I was doing the work without a definition for the type of work that I was doing. And it fully embraces the environmental principle of we speak for ourselves, which is the bedrock of self-determination. And the design, we designed it with integrity. So a whole lot of care taken to be respecting the knowledge and variances and input of communities while engaging them in the research as true working partners, and it leads to stronger communities. And so the ultimate goal was that communities will increase their impact and build their capacity to affect change that improves the health and well-being of their children. The model is designed with the aim of leaving each community better than they were when they joined the consortium. And so it's an intervention model in the sense that we have a strategy where the CBOs are basically building a track record of success. We've seen enhanced community participation, significant environmental justice victories that have improved local governance on zoning, permitting, and community engagement. And we build skills that help these communities acquire funding. All of the communities you see on the right-hand side of this slide have now come to a point where they can actually apply for grants and have received grants on their own from philanthropy and the government to support their work. That's an ultimate goal of ours. So moving from the fence line to the front lines is what we call it, the fight for equal protection. Environmental laws just did not protect minority and poor community, and people of color organized to fight for equal protection. So I'm moving now to what was happening in the movement. All of this is going on simultaneously with the development of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. So we were working on two fronts, building a movement and then building a center to respond to the needs of communities. And we go back to 1990. And if you look at this picture on the right-hand side, the second row, that's me and Bunyan Bryan. And if you go all the way to the other side, that is Robert Bullitt. And standing in the front is Dr. Dorceta Taylor. But those of you who know these icons in the movement, they were on. Charles Lee is in the back peeping over someone's head. And so it's Paul Mohai all the way in the back. So these are people that if you know anything about environmental justice, you know these folks. They've been around a long time, helping us to frame our discussions, our research, and our fight. This was organized by Bunyan Bryan and Paul Mohai. And it was the first meeting that we had to really figure out how we were going to work with EPA in particular, demanding meetings and demanding action as it relates to the harm that we knew was besetting environmental justice communities. So, and at the end of 1 year, a year later, after we organized this meeting and sent recommendations to EPA, we finally got a meeting with them, which began this relationship between EJ, the EJ movement, and EPA. I need to say here that at the time of our first meeting, there were very few people in the room. I believe I was the only woman in the room, and they wanted no part to speaking to community organizers or leaders. And as academicians at that time, we took the stand there would be no meeting without community representation. And so we were then able to bring um, grassroots organizers and community-based leaders from grassroots organizations into the room. That's how it all started. Give you a little history. And things start to change very quickly. In 1991, we held the first People of Color Summit. In 1991, we also had the National Minority Environmental Health Conference. This is all working with communities and government so that they could really start paying attention to the cries of our community about the pain and suffering they were dealing with and the health risks. And in 1992, the EPA Equity Report, which really was what we were asking them to really go in and investigate what's happening on the ground with communities. In 1993, we had the creation of the NEJAC, and I was one of the inaugural members of that first FACA to advise EPA. In 1994, we had the Environmental Justice Health and Research Symposium, which also started out as a really kind of small venture, but it grew to over 1,000 participants by the time we were finished. We had meetings every week. It was grueling to sit in the room with people who really didn't understand EJ, bench scientists who didn't really believe what we were saying because there was no research to support it. But by the end of that time, we had a conference where they were finally convinced and decided to invest, and IEHS in particular, in research in the ways that we wanted. Ken Oden at the top of that screen was singularly responsible for putting together, for example, the CUP grants, where universities had to include community groups in the work that they were doing, and they had to split the money. So it wasn't just the research, it was also resourcing communities. That was in 94. In 94, we had the executive order that was signed. I'm actually in this picture, but you only see my hair and jacket, red jacket with hair, but I was there signing that executive order with President Clinton in 94 and moving in the right direction. It takes us to what's happening now, the current federal response, which for me has been quite amazing. And I'd like to first of all say that the US EPA Administrator, Michael Regan, you see him here enjoying Sankofa Wetlands. It's a community-driven project in Louisiana in the lower Ninth Ward, which was hit severely by Katrina. But Sankofa, under the guidance of Rashida Ferdinand, is basically bringing that whole wetland back to a place where communities can enjoy it. It's quite a feat. And Regan visited, and here he is enjoying the park. And he also caught, you could see a little tiny fish in his hand, but he was happy that he got that in canoeing. This is what democracy looks like. But boy, what can I say about the Biden administration? And I think that when I finish, I'm going to show you a timeline where a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to go quickly now. In 2021, he signed, we had the executive order 14008. And that executive order included a lot of things, creating the WEJAC, which I'm also a member of. And there was a lot of responsibilities for making certain that federal funding went where it was supposed to go. Oh, right. And so I was a member of that, invited to be a member of that organ, I'm sorry, invited to be a member of the WEJAC, which is an advisory body to the President of the United States on environmental justice. The Biden administration also in 21 did the Justice 40 initiative. And that's where 40% of all of the benefits of money going to renewable projects needed to go to environmental justice or poor communities or communities that would have been most affected by climate change. That defining that 40% has been difficult, but benefits for us also means money. So while they couldn't say money, the benefits, of course, accrues to dollars, and we have seen that rolling in like never before. And in the Deep South Center, before the Justice 40 bill was signed, or before money was rolling out, we got a grant from the Bezos Foundation, which actually allowed us to begin working with communities, preparing them to be able to access funding when in fact it rolled out. And we have really worked with over 125 community-based organizations at that time. At this point in time, it's very likely over 200 communities that we've worked with on Justice 40 projects. And in 2022, the Biden-Harris administration gave us the Inflation Reduction Act. But what was the most important thing about that act was that there was $60 billion given specifically to environmental justice community and projects. I've put that Jay, what we should do, what we want. The Biden administration put billions of dollars into this space for us to access these funds, and we are busily trying to make certain that that happens. In 22, we got the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I needn't tell you, what big help that's been in communities, building bridges and you name it, all kinds of things to revitalize our communities. In 2022, he created the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. Now, remember, we just started in 2020. We're in 2022, and the amazing things that have been done in a short period of time are ones that the Harris-Biden administration should be applauded for, in spite of all of the difficulties that we've had. And I generally tell communities, we've always had the fight. We've always had the fight. This is the first time we had money to fight with, or real money to put in our communities, because we're still fighting horrible things. In 2023, he signed the executive order to revitalize our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. In 2023, the Tic Tac grants were awarded, and the Deep South Center received a Tic Tac grant. And so did Dr. Wilson, and so did Peggy Shepard with WEAC. So some of us who worked for a long time were able to successfully apply for and receive that grant to help communities. And so our Tic Tac is called CERC, and we're responsible for working with communities in Region 4 and in Region 6. And in 2024, a really amazing thing happened. The EPA HAN rule was enacted. And I believe that this is the most significant act, significant rule being put in place to really protect communities. Because this one rule dealt with 3 chemicals. And those 3 chemicals, if they are regulated, if we could do that with all of the dirty, nasty, toxic chemicals existing in Cantor Valley or elsewhere, we could completely change the look, the feel, the smell of that area and reduce our cancer rates and increase the quality of life and lifespan for our communities in this area. And in 2024, first ever national goal of 0 emissions for the freight sector was put in place by the Biden administration. And I'd like you to see this. So if you look at from 1990 to 1994, this is when really significant changes were made, activities were done with the federal government. Now I'm going to go from there to 2020, 2021. And while things did happen between that time, nothing really spectacular to speak about, except during the Obama administration, there was a real attempt to institutionalize some of the protections. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But in 2020, there was an explosion in the area of work to assist environmental justice, climate impacted and poor communities, and being more resilient and really becoming a part of this democratic process that we have been excluded from for such a very long time. Setbacks and successes. So the Deep South Center conducted this study. It's called The More Things Change, the More They Remain the Same. We really looked at our 1994 study with the GIS mapping of the corridor, and then looked at it again in 2023. And what we basically found that while a lot of things have changed in terms of the amount of emissions being released in the corridor, that's on its way back up because our two Republican administrations just embraced the petrochemical industry. But while we saw that happening, what we saw was that for African Americans, the situation is actually getting worse. So we find that in parishes where Black people live, white people have actually reduced the amount of missions that they are receiving, where Black communities are receiving more. And there are attempts to increase the amounts of number of facilities and pollution even more in communities that are predominantly African American. For example, in Ascension Parish, of the 29 new facilities they're trying to put in this 85-mile stretch of land, 9 facilities are being looked at for Ascension Parish, but specifically in Donaldsonville, which is a predominantly Black community. Greenhouse gases will go up in these areas, and everything that we're fighting against is going in the wrong direction in Louisiana. I always say we have a Confederate government in place right now who's trying to take us back, happen, we will continue to fight. In Louisiana, for example, EPA was blocked from investigating racial disparities in Louisiana's Cancer Alley. And it's a tragedy in the sense that they were looking at a particular facility. Dinka was one of them, but for the whole parish, we know, and the research is there showing that African Americans are situated in places closest to these facilities, being more exposure to these toxic chemicals, having higher cancer rates. And if you look at Title VI is what is the rule that was used to sue Louisiana because of the exposure to these chemicals that was caused. And because the department, and let me be clearer. So the Department of Environmental Quality is funded by the federal government. Title VI says that if you receive federal funding, you cannot use it to discriminate, to really attack people's civil rights. So we looked at it as a civil rights issue, where the federal government giving the Department of Environmental Quality money, and they were using that money in ways that discriminated against Black people because we were exposed to more facilities, had higher cancer rates, and more risk, period, from emissions. So in this particular case, the case had been won. With our Democratic governor, in fact, they were already at a point of settling. What's the remedy? What can we do to remedy this situation? At that time, the person who is now the Louisiana governor was the Attorney General, and he filed suit, and the Department of Justice acquiesced. That, in my mind, was a serious disservice to the people of Louisiana and other communities around the country who are fighting the same fight. It really is an attack on environmental justice because we talk about discriminatory factors. And what the governor said was that if it's not intentional, then you can't do it. We can show clearly that the siting of these facilities near Black people was in fact intentional. And you know it's intentional by the fact because white people were clearly safely moved away from these emissions. So that's a setback, but not totally, because we will continue to fight. And I'm moving going too slowly now. It went back to court and we lost. But the communiversity model, for example, has had a lot of wins. And I don't have time to go through them, but I'm going to show them to you very quickly. You know, what's happening in Houston, Texas, with Achieving Community Tasks Successfully, or ACTS, an unbelievable community-based organization making unbelievable changes in protecting their community. And a lot of it is based on, we call it research to action. So research to collect data, to make your case, and then bring about changes. And with all of our communities, we've done that. They've all been involved in collecting data, deciding what project they wanted to work on, collecting data, using that data to bring about change, to interact with government. And they've all had some wins. In Mobile, they won the approval of the Mobile Zoning Board to establish a safe zone for Africatown communities. And then we have ECHO that focuses on racial equity, on flood protection and wetlands. So they holded approval by the Mississippi Permit Board for a proposed military ammunition storage facility on a contaminated site in the community. We have since lost that battle, but we did fight it, and we tend to continue fighting. We won once, we lost. This is the way it is in EJ. And then unity in the family. So the organization won the approval of Escambia County Board of Commissioners to develop new permit requirements, and they actually successfully blocked 3 new landfill permits in their community. So we see communities winning. And then the Sankofa Park, which has been amazing, bringing that place back to what it was when I was a child. It's amazing to see it. And if you visit New Orleans, you should certainly do that. And local impacts. So some great things have happened on the ground with the work that we're doing. New Orleans actually has a renewable and clean portfolio standard. So, and we're the only city to have that, because we actually regulate our own own facilities, energy. We control energy, I'll put it like that. And that doesn't happen in a lot of cities, but it does happen in New Orleans, and we've had that win. And we actually blazed a trail on CCS. We were able to get our city council to vote against the deployment of pipelines, injection wells, or anything that has to do with the infrastructure for carbon capture and storage. And we've encouraged other communities to do the same. I think my time is up. I'm going to move fast. We got $132 million, y'all, for the first time in New Orleans to work on projects, including the Sankofa Park that we talked about. And the charge, and I'm saying to you, get fired up for justice. And my advice to Generation Next, because I know we're talking to students, we're also talking to community people, but we're asking, I would say practice your trade, what you're learning in school now. Be sure to practice it. Conduct research and present it at conferences, something like this one. Connect with real community heroes who are fighting the good fight. Know that your experience is not void. You can see things coming full circle. You can see the impact. Seek enlightenment through focused education on issues, and seek awareness, connection, and impassioned action. The charge, use the knowledge you have acquired and turn it into something good and powerful. Become civically engaged. Reach, don't preach. Become an activist scholar. And in closing, I want to say this. It is my fervent wish that we enshrine the democratic process in our society in such a way that we defeat climate change. We must truly embrace inclusion, fairness, and justice in order to move society forward in accomplishing transitions to an equitable, renewable energy economy. And here at the Deep South Center, we strive to work ourselves out of a job, moving into a time when the DSCJ becomes an appreciated memory in the annals of history. I thank you for your time. So Kobe, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Excellent presentation. I know I gave you a tough task and not a lot of time to knock that task out. And hopefully the audience, y'all were able to absorb that full course, 7 course turducken that Dr. Wright just gave y'all. But really, just want to, thank you, Dr. Wright. And in the words of a fellow Mississippian, Fannie Lou Hamer, I just want to say to you and the audience, when I liberate myself, I liberate others. If you don't speak out, ain't nobody going to speak for you. That's the EJ
Right.
movement, y'all.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
So, Dr. Wright, we have a few minutes. Just a question, just to follow, because again, just to hone in on a few items that you covered. You covered a lot of stuff. We want to celebrate, what is happening, as you said, with this administration. I like to say this administration has done more for environmental justice than history administrations.
Yeah, that's right.
All administrations combined, right? So we want to give them kudos and really show appreciation for that from a distributional justice, perspective, right? And the
Yes.
fact, as you said, that those who are at the front line should be at the front of the line when it comes to the money and the benefits, right? So can you kind of speak a little bit more about the future when it comes to, you talked about your great work with the Tic Tac. What do you would like to see this administration or the next administration do to make sure we continue bending that arc towards justice?
Mhm. Well, I think that one of the things so let me say this first of all. The Biden-Harris administration, more than anyone, listened to us. I was a part of the transition team. And so they listened to us and they really attempted to put in place the things that we asked them to do. This is a first time out, and they've made some mistakes. The mistakes that they're making, we're working hard to try to fix, and that is they are certainly committed to the funding going in the right places and to the right people. But as usual, when you have this kind of money coming out, there are all kinds of people going after these funds, and they haven't been completely successful in being able to fund the kinds of groups that really should have the money. But there's another reason, Sokobi. The Deep South Center has been trying to build a grassroots infrastructure for a very long time. So if you don't build that infrastructure or ecosystem so that communities have the capacity to access the funding and do the work, what's happening is the money is out there and we're trying to catch up. We're trying to get to a point where we have more and more communities with the capacity. And I always like to speak to democracy because one of the reasons that we don't have the capacity is that we've been locked out of the democratic process. That's the process that gives you voice in areas like EPA, Department of Environmental Quality, where industry is put. How do you elect people who will represent you? Being disenfranchised, not being allowed to really be involved in democracy is why we are here. And that's, we've gone from slavery, Jim Crow. So there are many years of this. It's going to take time to build that infrastructure, but I believe we're on the way. It's going to take time to build what we call Generation Next, which I believe you are involved in, all of us are involved with. These are young people and students, giving them helping them to develop their craft in whatever area they intend to work, be it a researcher, that's fine, a teacher, being an advocate, being a scholar. I like to tell people that I was, first of all, a researcher and teacher, but I was, because of my own background and my experience, I was driven to do something more. That research to action paradigm is one that we should all follow. Research for research's sake means nothing, but research for action and to support something is where we should all be. And we need to work closer with communities, bringing students and universities together in a way that benefits all of us and takes us to a more just world and environment. So this is hard work. Like if I had one sentence, one word that I could use to fix it all, it would have to be Shazam. That means that I would have to have some magical power. There is no one word for fixing this. There is no one person that can fix it. Government has to be involved in it, and government needs to resource this movement in a way that we get to a place that climate change is not a problem for us anymore. Equity and justice is one, where we don't have communities locked out of systems. We have to work towards a more equitable and just society for us to have peace. And I know at my age, I want peace, but I'm willing to work for it, and I have done for over 40 years.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Appreciate that. I hope all the audience that's out there on the streaming, hopefully y'all really took in what Dr. Wright said. Young people out there, your generation next, right? We need you in this movement. And then as Dr. Wright said, an unjust system can't get us justice. You got to change the ecosystem. It has to be a grassroots, justice-centered, people-centered, right, ecosystem to make sure that those, again, who are at the front line are at the front of line when it comes to money and actually getting those dollars. So thank
Yes.
you again, Dr. Wright. Thank you for opening
Thank
up
you. Have a
this
great
10th symposium.
conference.
Thank you,
Yes.
and stay safe down there in Louisiana, New Orleans with the hurricane.
Yes. I
We
was
pray for
wondering,
everybody.
Jacoby,
Yeah,
I was
yes, ma'am.
wondering if I'd be able to do this, but it's going to hit us at about 1 o'clock. So I want to give a
Okay.
special thanks to my IT person who came over to make sure that I was on this morning. But we're hoping that we will get it, but we're not expecting it to be a Katrina event, if you know what I mean. So we feel pretty blessed right now, but I'll be able to tell you tomorrow how it
Yes,
how
ma'am.
it how it landed. Thank you, everyone, and have a great conference. I wish I could be there with you.
Thank you. Stay safe,
All
Dr.
right.
Wright.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I'm gonna switch over now to a couple of slides. Let me share my screen to get us. Thank you again, everyone who joined us for this session. And please move to the next sessions, which begin at 11:10. Thanks, and have a good rest of the day and enjoy the symposium.